The sun cast a cruel spotlight on the wooden post where Rosalind Hayes stood shackled, her fair skin burning under the merciless New Mexico Territory heat of 1878. Dust swirled around her torn calico dress as jeering men gathered for the impromptu bride auction, a barbaric practice that had emerged in some lawless frontier towns where desperate women, often immigrants or those fallen on hard times, were sold to the highest bidder under the thin pretense of marriage. $2 for this fine specimen, shouted the weathered auctioneer, a man known locally as Silas Townsend, his voice carrying across the dusty main street of White Ridge. Look at them golden curls. A true lady to warm your cabin and cook your meals. Rosalind kept her gaze fixed on the dirt beneath her feet, refusing to make eye contact with the crowd of miners, ranch hands, and drifters who called out crude remarks. 3 days earlier, she had been traveling west by stagecoach, seeking employment as a schoolteacher, when bandits attacked. They'd killed the driver and the male passengers, stealing valuables before dragging her to this godforsaken town where the local sheriff seemed content to look the other way for a cut of the auction profits. $5, called a grizzled miner, his beard stained yellow from tobacco. $7, countered another man, missing several teeth and reeking of whiskey even from yards away. Rosalind closed her eyes, silently praying for deliverance while tugging futilely at the iron shackles that bit into her wrists. Her parents were dead, her meager savings stolen. There was no one searching for her, no rescue on the horizon. $10, shouted a new voice from the back of the crowd. The men parted to reveal a tall figure astride a chestnut stallion. Broad-shouldered and straight-backed, the newcomer guided his horse forward through the parting crowd. His face was partially shadowed by a wide-brimmed black hat, but Rosalind could see a strong jawline darkened with several days' worth of stubble. "Well now, Maxwell Prescott, didn't expect to see you in town today," the auctioneer called with a nervous laugh. Everyone knew Maxwell Prescott owned the largest cattle ranch in the territory, the Crescent P, and his word carried weight even in a lawless place like White Ridge. $15, called the toothless man, unwilling to back down. Maxwell Prescott dismounted with fluid grace, the spurs on his worn boots jangling as he approached. $100, he stated flatly, his voice carrying no room for challenge. A collective gasp rippled through the crowd. That kind of money could buy a small herd of cattle or enough supplies to last through winter. Going once, going twice. The auctioneer didn't bother waiting for further bids. Sold to Mr. Prescott. Rosalind finally lifted her gaze to study the man who had purchased her. He appeared to be in his early 30s, with intense blue eyes that revealed nothing of his intentions. Unlike the other men, whose gazes had roamed her body like hungry wolves, Maxwell Prescott looked at her face, his expression unreadable. He approached the post where she stood bound, reaching into his pocket to produce a small key. "Sheriff Dobbs gave this to me," he explained quietly. "Seems he suddenly remembered he had other business when he saw me ride in." The sheriff, who had been overseeing the proceedings from the shade of the saloon porch, was indeed nowhere to be seen. With steady hands, Maxwell unlocked her shackles. Rosalind immediately rubbed her raw wrists, uncertain whether to thank him or run. Before she could decide, he removed his leather duster and draped it gently around her shoulders, covering her torn dress. "I'm not what you think," he said in a low voice meant only for her. "I'm not taking you anywhere you don't want to go. But we need to leave now, before these men change their minds." Doubt and suspicion warred with desperate hope in her chest. "Why should I trust you?" A flicker of understanding crossed his features. "You shouldn't. But right now I'm offering you a choice, which is more than anyone else here has done." He was right. And with the crowd of disappointed men beginning to grumble and cast hostile glances their way, she had precious little time to decide. "What do you propose?" Rosalind asked, her voice hoarse from days without adequate water. "We ride to my ranch. I have a housekeeper there, Mrs. Tillman. She's a good woman. You can stay, recover your strength, and then I'll help you get wherever you want to go. No strings attached. Something in his direct gaze made her believe him, or perhaps it was merely that any alternative was unthinkable. Very well, Mr. Prescott. He helped her onto his horse before mounting behind her, one arm securely around her waist as he guided the stallion away from town. Rosalind sat stiffly, acutely aware of the solid warmth of his chest against her back. They rode in silence for several miles, leaving the squalid town behind for rolling grasslands dotted with scrub brush and the occasional cottonwood. "I'm sorry for what happened to you," Maxwell finally said. "White Ridge has been going downhill since the silver mine started attracting every scoundrel in the territory. You live near such a place?" Rosalind couldn't keep the judgment from her voice. "My family settled here long before the mine opened. 20,000 acres of good grazing land isn't something you abandon because bad neighbors move in." There was no defensiveness in his tone, just simple fact. Besides, someone needs to stand for what's right, especially in places where wrong has taken hold. Rosalind considered his words as they continued riding. The sun began its westward descent, painting the landscape in gold and amber hues. After about an hour, they crested a hill, revealing a sprawling ranch below. A large main house built of sturdy logs and stone stood proudly among several outbuildings, corrals, and a bunkhouse. Cattle grazed in the distance, and smoke curled invitingly from the main house chimney. "Welcome to Crescent P," Maxwell said, a note of pride evident in his voice. "It's not fancy, but it's peaceful." Peace was exactly what Rosalind needed most. As they approached the house, a plump woman with iron-gray hair pulled back in a severe bun emerged from the front door, wiping her hands on her apron. "Maxwell Prescott, I wasn't expecting you back until tomorrow." Her scolding tone softened when she noticed Rosalind. "And who might this be?" Maxwell dismounted and helped Rosalind down before briefly explaining the situation, tactfully omitting the more distressing details of her captivity. Mrs. Tillman's kind face hardened momentarily. "Those White Ridge miscreants need a good lesson in Christian behavior," she muttered before turning a motherly smile to Rosalind. "Come inside, dear. Let's get you cleaned up and fed. You look half-starved." Within an hour, Rosalind found herself bathed, dressed in a borrowed nightgown and robe, and seated at a kitchen table with a bowl of hearty stew before her. Maxwell had discreetly disappeared after delivering her to Mrs. Tillman's care, giving her space to recover her dignity. "Mr. Prescott has a good heart," Mrs. Tillman commented as she placed a slice of fresh bread beside Rosalind's bowl. "Lost his parents to influenza 5 years back. Been running this place alone ever since, though he's got good men working for him. He seems different from the others in town," Rosalind ventured. Mrs. Tillman snorted. "That's because he is. His mother was educated back east before she married his father. Made sure her son grew up knowing more than just cattle and horses. There's a whole library in this house that he actually reads." She smiled fondly. "Not that he isn't every inch a rancher. Works harder than any man I know." Rosalind listened attentively, trying to reconcile the gentle-mannered man who had rescued her with the hardened rancher Mrs. Tillman described. "Now," the housekeeper continued, "you're welcome to stay as long as you need. There's a small guest room upstairs that's yours until you decide what's next. No one will bother you here." Exhaustion from her ordeal washed over Rosalind, and she managed only a few spoonfuls of stew before her eyelids grew heavy. Mrs. Tillman noticed immediately and helped her upstairs to a small but comfortable bedroom. As soon as her head touched the pillow, Rosalind fell into the first peaceful sleep she'd had in days. Morning arrived with golden light streaming through lace curtains. For a moment, Rosalind was disoriented, forgetting where she was until the events of the previous day came flooding back. She sat up, finding a simple blue dress laid out for her, along with undergarments and a pair of modest boots. Everything was slightly too large, but clean and well made. After dressing, She made her way downstairs to find Mrs. Tillman bustling about the kitchen. "Good morning, dear. Sleep well? There's coffee on the stove and biscuits just came out of the oven. Mr. Prescott's already been out since dawn, checking the south pasture." "Thank you for the clothes," Rosalind said, accepting a steaming cup of coffee. Those were Maxwell's sister's things. She married a banker in Denver 2 years ago, left some of her simpler dresses behind. "Figure they'll do until we can get you properly outfitted." Rosalind sipped her coffee, wondering what she should do next. Her plans to become a schoolteacher in Santa Fe seemed impossible now, with her references and small savings lost in the stagecoach robbery. A knock at the back door interrupted her thoughts. Maxwell entered, removing his hat as he crossed the threshold. His dark hair was slightly damp with sweat, his face tanned from long days under the sun. "Miss Hayes," he greeted her with a respectful nod. "I hope you're feeling better this morning." "Much better. Thank you, Mr. Prescott. I'm grateful for your hospitality." He accepted a cup of coffee from Mrs. Tillman before sitting at the table across from Rosalind. "I've been thinking about your situation. If you're still intent on reaching Santa Fe, I can arrange for one of my men to escort you there safely when you're ready." The kindness of his offer touched her, but reality weighed heavily. "I'm afraid my prospects in Santa Fe depended on recommendations and savings that were stolen during the attack." Maxwell considered this. "What were you planning to do there?" "I was to be a schoolteacher. I have experience teaching back in Ohio, but without my letters of recommendation." "We don't have a proper school here," Maxwell said thoughtfully. "Some of the ranch hands have families, and there are a few homesteaders nearby with children. They've been talking about needing someone to teach the basics at least." Hope flickered briefly in Rosalind's chest. "Are you suggesting?" "It wouldn't be a grand schoolhouse, just the old bunkhouse we don't use anymore. We could fix it up, get some benches, and a blackboard. The pay wouldn't match what you might have earned in Santa Fe, but you'd have room and board here at the main house." Mrs. Tillman beamed approvingly. "That's a fine idea. Been saying for years these children need proper schooling." Rosalind hesitated. "It's a generous offer, Mr. Prescott, but I wouldn't want you to feel obligated because of how we met." Maxwell's blue eyes held hers steadily. "This has nothing to do with obligation. We need a teacher. You need a position. It's a simple arrangement that benefits us both." There was logic in his words, and the prospect of having purpose again appealed to her. "I would need to meet the families first to see if they approve of me teaching their children." "Of course. I'll arrange it for later this week, after you've had time to regain your strength." The matter decided for the moment, Maxwell excused himself to return to his work, leaving Rosalind with much to consider. The next few days fell into a gentle rhythm. Rosalind gradually recovered her strength, helping Mrs. Tillman with household tasks and exploring the ranch's immediate surroundings. Maxwell was often absent during daylight hours, overseeing ranch operations, but joined them for supper each evening. During these meals, Rosalind discovered he was well-read and thoughtful, discussing everything from literature to territorial politics with surprising insight. On the fourth day, several families gathered at the ranch for a picnic lunch and to meet the prospective teacher. Rosalind, dressed in one of the borrowed dresses that Mrs. Tillman had altered to fit better, greeted each family warmly. There were 12 children of varying ages, from 6 to 15, all eager for education despite their frontier upbringing. Miss Hayes taught at a school in Ohio for 3 years, Maxwell explained to the assembled parents. She's well qualified to teach reading, writing, arithmetic, and history. The parents seemed impressed, particularly when Rosalind answered their questions with confidence and genuine enthusiasm for education. By day's end, it was agreed that school would begin the following Monday in the refurbished bunkhouse, with Maxwell providing basic supplies and each family contributing what they could toward Rosalind's modest salary. As the families departed, Rosalind found herself standing beside Maxwell on the porch, watching the wagons disappear down the dusty road. "Thank you," she said softly. This opportunity means more than I can express." He glanced down at her, the setting sun catching the gold flecks in his blue eyes. "You earn their trust on your own merit. I merely made the introduction." "Nevertheless, without your intervention in White Ridge." She trailed off, the memory still too painful to articulate fully. Maxwell's expression darkened. What happened there should never have happened at all. The territorial governor needs to send a marshal to clean up that town. "Have you always been so concerned with justice, Mr. Prescott?" Rosalind asked, curious about the man who had so dramatically altered her fate. A hint of a smile touched his lips. "My father taught me that a man's worth isn't measured by the size of his herd or the land he owns, but by whether he stands up when standing is hard." He paused, looking out over his property. "And please call me Maxwell. Mr. Prescott makes me feel like my father." "Then you must call me Rosalind," she replied, feeling a curious warmth that had nothing to do with the lingering heat of the day. The following weeks were busy ones as Rosalind established her small school. The old bunkhouse had been transformed with fresh whitewash, sturdy benches, and a proper blackboard. Maxwell had even ordered books from Denver, though they would take some time to arrive. Meanwhile, Rosalind used what resources were available: the ranch's library, a well-worn Bible, and nature itself for science lessons. Teaching brought Rosalind back to herself. The trauma of her capture and the auction began to recede as she immersed herself in her students' education. The children were eager learners, making up in enthusiasm what they lacked in prior schooling. Maxwell often observed the classes from a distance, never interrupting but clearly approving of what he saw. One evening after supper, as they sat on the porch enjoying the cool night air, he commented, "You're a natural teacher. Those children adore you." Rosalind smiled, pleased by his observation. "They're wonderful students. Billy Thompson has a real gift for mathematics, and Sarah Mitchell could be a writer someday with her imagination." "You see their potential," Maxwell noted. "That's rare out here, where most children are valued mainly for the work they can do on farms and ranches." "Every child deserves the chance to develop their mind, regardless of where they live," Rosalind replied passionately. "Education opens doors that might otherwise remain closed forever." Maxwell studied her in the lantern light, something unreadable in his expression. "You're quite remarkable, Rosalind Hayes." The compliment sent an unexpected flutter through her chest. Over the weeks, she had grown increasingly aware of Maxwell, his quiet strength, his kindness to his workers, his gentle way with animals. He was unlike any man she had known back in Ohio, where potential suitors had been either bookish town boys or rough farmers with little interest in ideas beyond their fields. "I'm just doing what I was trained to do," she demurred. "No," he disagreed softly. "You're doing far more. You're bringing hope and possibility to this remote corner of the territory." Their conversation was interrupted by the arrival of one of the ranch hands with an urgent matter requiring Maxwell's attention. As he excused himself, Rosalind was left to ponder the growing complexity of her feelings toward the man who had saved her from a terrible fate. Autumn arrived, painting the landscape in russet and gold. The school flourished, with 3 more children joining as word spread of the quality of instruction. Rosalind had become a respected figure in the small community, invited to Sunday dinners and social gatherings. Through it all, she continued living at the Crescent P, her temporary arrangement evolving into something more permanent, without formal discussion. One crisp October morning, Rosalind was alone in the schoolhouse preparing lessons when she heard horses approaching. Looking up, she was startled to see 3 rough-looking men dismounting outside. She immediately recognized one of them, the toothless man who had bid on her at the auction. Fear clutched at her throat as the men entered without knocking. The leader, a tall man with a jagged scar across one cheek, removed his hat in a mockery of politeness. "Well, well. So this is where that fancy rancher hid you away," he drawled. "Remember me, Miss Hayes? Name's Lyle Whitaker. I was mighty disappointed when Prescott outbid us all in White Ridge. Rosalind straightened her spine, refusing to show fear despite her racing heart. This is a schoolhouse, Mr. Whitaker. I must ask you to leave immediately. The toothless man spat tobacco juice onto the clean floor. Putting on airs now, are ya? You're still just merchandise that Prescott bought. What do you want? Rosalind demanded, her hand inching toward the drawer where she kept a small derringer that Maxwell had insisted she carry. Prescott's been causing trouble for our business interests in White Ridge, Scarface explained with false pleasantness. Writing letters to the governor, trying to get a marshal sent in. We figured taking his woman might encourage him to mind his own affairs. I am not his woman, Rosalind stated firmly, though her pulse jumped at even the suggestion. And you are trespassing. The third man, who had remained silent until now, suddenly lunged forward and grabbed her arm. Don't matter what you are. You're coming with us. Rosalind managed to pull open the drawer and grasp the derringer, but the toothless man wrenched it from her hand before she could aim it. A scream died in her throat as rough hands bound her wrists with rope. Prescott will come for her, the toothless man warned nervously. He's got a reputation with a gun. That's what we're counting on, Scarface replied with a cruel smile. But he'll come alone, thinking he can negotiate. And then we'll have him exactly where we want him. They dragged Rosalind outside and forced her onto a horse, tying her securely to the saddle. As they rode away from the schoolhouse, she prayed fervently that none of her students would arrive early to witness her abduction or, worse, be harmed themselves. The men rode hard for several hours, heading into rugged terrain that Rosalind didn't recognize. Eventually, they arrived at a dilapidated cabin nestled against a rocky hillside, while hidden from any main trails. Inside, they bound her to a chair, ignoring her protests and questions about their intentions. Scarface, who appeared to be the leader, finally explained. Prescott's been a thorn in our side for years. He won't sell his water rights, won't let us drive cattle through his land to avoid the territorial taxes, and now he's stirring up trouble with the authorities. Once he shows up looking for you, we'll make him an offer his life and yours in exchange for his cooperation and a sizable portion of his land. He won't give in to extortion, Rosalind said with more confidence than she felt. Scarface leaned in close, his breath foul. Then I guess you'll both die out here, where nobody will find you until spring thaw. The hours crawled by with excruciating slowness. The men drank whiskey and played cards, occasionally arguing among themselves, but largely ignoring Rosalind except to offer her water once. As darkness fell, her fear grew, not for herself, but for Maxwell. She knew he would come for her, and she couldn't bear the thought of him walking into this trap because of her. Near midnight, the sound of approaching hoofbeats sent the men scrambling for their weapons. Scarface positioned himself behind the door, while the others took up positions at the windows. Remember, we need him alive long enough to sign over those water rights, Scarface hissed. The hoofbeats stopped some distance from the cabin. Silence stretched for several long moments before a voice called out, Whitaker, I know you're in there. Let Miss Hayes go, and we can talk terms. It was Maxwell's voice, strong and steady despite the danger. Rosalind's heart contracted painfully at the realization that he had indeed come alone. Come on in, Prescott, Scarface shouted back. Unarmed, hands where we can see them. Not until I see that Miss Hayes is unharmed. Scarface cursed under his breath, then nodded to the toothless man, who roughly pulled Rosalind to her feet and pushed her toward the door. He opened it just enough to shove her partially through, keeping a gun pressed to her side. In the moonlight, she could see Maxwell standing about 20 yards away, his hands raised. Their eyes met briefly, and she tried to convey a warning with her gaze. Satisfied, the toothless man called. Now get in here, nice and slow. Let her go first, Maxwell countered. Send her to my horse. Then I'll come in. Scarface appeared beside them in the doorway. That's not how this works, Prescott. You come in now, or she dies right here. Maxwell took a step forward, then suddenly dropped to the ground as a shot rang out from the darkness behind him. The toothless man crumpled with a cry of pain, releasing Rosalind. More shots followed in rapid succession, and she realized Maxwell hadn't come alone after all his ranch hands were positioned in the surrounding darkness. Scarface grabbed Rosalind, using her as a shield as he backed into the cabin. Call them off, Prescott, or she's dead. From her position, Rosalind could see Maxwell rise to his feet, a grim expression on his face. It's over, Whitaker. The territorial marshal is with my men. There's no way out for you. A moment of tense silence followed before Scarface suddenly shoved Rosalind forward through the doorway. She stumbled and fell as he made a desperate break for the back of the cabin. Gunshots echoed in the night, and then silence fell once more. Strong hands gently helped Rosalind to her feet, and she found herself looking into Maxwell's concerned face. Are you hurt? He asked urgently, his hands carefully untying her bonds. No, she managed, her voice shaky. How did you find me? One of the children saw them take you and ran to the ranch. His voice was tight with barely controlled emotion. I've never been so frightened in my life, thinking what they might do to you. As soon as her hands were free, Rosalind did something she never would have imagined doing just months earlier. She threw her arms around Maxwell's neck, holding him tightly as relief coursed through her. After a moment's surprise, his arms encircled her waist, drawing her closer. I was afraid you would come alone, she whispered against his shoulder. I nearly did, he admitted. But my foreman, Jake, convinced me that would be foolish. He rounded up the men and sent word to Marshal Dawson, who's been staying in the area investigating White Ridge. Gradually, Rosalind became aware of men moving around them, securing the cabin and checking the fallen kidnappers. Reluctantly, she stepped back from Maxwell's embrace, though he kept a protective hand at the small of her back. A distinguished man wearing a marshal's badge approached them. Miss Hayes?
I'm Marshal Dawson.
Glad to see you're unharmed. These men are part of a gang I've been tracking for months, involved in everything from cattle rustling to kidnapping. Your abduction may be the break we needed to finally clean up White Ridge. The ride back to Crescent P was long but far more pleasant than the journey to the cabin had been. Maxwell insisted Rosalind ride with him, his arms secure around her as he guided his horse homeward. The first light of dawn was breaking across the eastern horizon when they finally arrived at the ranch, where Mrs. Tillman waited anxiously on the porch. After being fussed over, fed, and finally allowed to rest, Rosalind slept deeply until late afternoon. When she awoke, she found a note from Maxwell asking her to meet him in the garden when she was ready. She found him seated on a bench beneath a gnarled apple tree, staring thoughtfully at the mountains in the distance. He stood immediately upon seeing her, his face lighting with a smile that made her heart skip. How are you feeling? He asked as she joined him on the bench. Much better after rest and Mrs. Tillman's cooking, Rosalind assured him. The marshal came by earlier to take my statement. He says with our testimony and evidence they found at the cabin, those men will face serious charges. Maxwell nodded, satisfaction evident in his expression. White Ridge may finally have a chance to become a decent town again. He hesitated, then added more softly, but that's not what I wanted to discuss with you. Something in his tone made Rosalind's pulse quicken. Oh! He turned slightly to face her more directly. Yesterday, when I thought I might lose you, I realized something I should have acknowledged weeks ago. His hand found hers, warm and strong. I've developed feelings for you, Rosalind, deep feelings that go far beyond admiration for your teaching abilities or gratitude that you've brightened this ranch with your presence. Joy blossomed in her chest, expanding until she felt she might float away with the sensation. I've developed feelings for you as well, Maxwell, she admitted, her voice hardly more than a whisper. Relief and happiness transformed his features. I know this is sudden, and after everything you've been through, the last thing I want to do is pressure you. But I want you to know that my intentions are honorable. I would like to court you properly if you're willing." Rosalind considered his words, thinking of all that had transpired since that terrible day in White Ridge. What had begun as the darkest moment of her life had somehow led her to this man, this place, and a sense of purpose and belonging she had never expected to find. "I would like that very much," she replied, squeezing his hand. Maxwell's smile was radiant as he leaned forward slowly, giving her ample time to pull away if she wished. Instead, Rosalind met him halfway, their lips meeting in a gentle kiss that held promise of deeper passion to come. When they parted, Maxwell rested his forehead against hers. "I want you to know that I never expected this when I rode into White Ridge that day. I only knew I couldn't stand by and watch such an injustice." "I know," Rosalind assured him. "That's part of why I love you." The words had slipped out unbidden, but she found she didn't regret them. Maxwell's eyes widened briefly before crinkling at the corners with joy. "And I love you, Rosalind Hayes. Against all odds and expectations, I love you." As the sun began to set, painting the western sky in brilliant hues of orange and pink, they remained in the garden, planning their future together. The school would continue and expand, the ranch would flourish, and perhaps someday children of their own would run across these fields. From the horror of being shackled to an auction post to finding true love and purpose in this wild territory, Rosalind's journey had come full circle. As Maxwell's arm encircled her shoulders, drawing her close against the evening chill, she said a silent prayer of gratitude for the strange twist of fate that had brought her to this moment, this man, this life that now stretched before them full of promise. 6 months later, on a perfect spring day with wildflowers carpeting the meadows, Rosalind Hayes became Rosalind Prescott in a ceremony attended by her students, neighboring ranchers, and even Marshall Dawson, who had successfully cleaned up White Ridge and established a proper law enforcement presence there. As Maxwell slipped a simple gold band onto her finger, he whispered words meant only for her. "From this day forward, the only chains between us will be those of love and respect." And as they sealed their vows with a kiss, surrounded by the community they had helped build, Rosalind knew with absolute certainty that sometimes, even in the wildest places, justice and love could triumph together.